Have you ever wondered about the true nature of good and evil, or the origins of Lucifer's fall from grace? What if we could see firsthand the battle between light and darkness that shapes our world? Isabella Simmons, a woman from Los Angeles, had an experience that not only changed her life, but also provided a rare glimpse into the spiritual realm. After a near-death experience following a traumatic injury at work, Isabella found herself in the presence of Jesus, where she was shown profound truths about the cosmic struggle between good and evil. In her powerful testimony, Isabella shares the incredible vision she was granted during her time beyond the physical world, witnessing the transformation of Lucifer from the most radiant of angels to the being consumed by pride and rebellion. She also reveals the deeper purpose behind the spiritual battle and how each of us plays a role in it through the choices we make. This story is not just about the past. It's a powerful reminder of the ongoing battle we face in our daily lives, and the importance of love, humility, and free will in overcoming the darkness around us. Let's now dive into Isabella's profound experience and the life-changing lessons she learned. A few months ago, Isabella Simmons, a 38-year-old woman, had an experience that would forever change her understanding of life, death, and the spiritual realm. Isabella, who had always been a highly dedicated and rational professional, had never really thought much about the afterlife or the concept of evil beyond what she encountered in her medical practice. But one night, while working a busy Friday shift in the emergency room, Isabella's world was completely transformed after a tragic accident. It all began as a typical night at the hospital, with emergency cases piling up one after another. Isabella, who was used to managing critical patients, was performing her usual duties when a slip caused her to fall, leading to an accident that would put her life in jeopardy. She hit her head violently against the edge of a metal supply cart, and the impact was so severe that it left her unconscious almost instantly. What followed was a medical emergency that none of her colleagues could have anticipated. In the chaos that ensued, Isabella's condition rapidly worsened. She had suffered a traumatic brain injury, and the impact of her fall caused her heart to stop beating. As the medical team rushed to stabilize her, they did not know whether she would make it through the night. Her body was lifeless, and the ER team worked relentlessly to revive her. During this critical time, Isabella experienced what is known as a near-death experience, NDE, a phenomenon that has been reported by countless people who have been clinically dead for a brief period and later revived. During the time that Isabella's heart had stopped beating, her consciousness left her physical body, and she found herself in a completely different realm. The details of what happened during that period were both stunning and deeply profound. It was not just a moment of unconsciousness, but an experience that would completely reshape her understanding of reality. For nearly 3 minutes, Isabella was completely disconnected from the world she knew. While her doctors and colleagues were battling to save her, Isabella was transported to a dimension beyond physical existence, where she would encounter something far greater than herself. As her heart stopped, Isabella found herself enveloped in a sense of profound peace. Unlike anything she had experienced on Earth, this peace was complete and unshakable. It was a peaceful stillness where there was no pain, no fear, and no sense of time. She felt entirely safe, embraced in a sense of love and understanding that seemed to come from every direction. There was no weight, no tension, only calm. It was a stark contrast to the bustling chaos of the emergency room where she had just been, and a stark contrast to the stress and pressures of her daily life. As she stood in this serene state, she became aware of a brilliant light in the distance. Drawn toward it, as if guided by an unseen hand, Isabella moved closer, knowing instinctively that it was where she needed to be. The light grew brighter and more enveloping as she approached, but it was not blinding. Rather, it was gentle, warm, and inviting. It was a pure, radiant light that filled her with a sense of purpose and peace, as though everything in the universe had been aligned for this very moment. It was in this light that Isabella saw Jesus Christ. His presence was unmistakable, overwhelming in its love and wisdom. She could feel his divine nature emanating from him, a presence so profound and pure that it made everything else seem insignificant in comparison. She had no fear or hesitation. She only felt the deep and abiding love that flowed from him, a love so deep it seemed to resonate with the core of her being. Jesus greeted Isabella warmly, his voice like a gentle melody that soothed her soul. He told her that her arrival was earlier than expected, but that he had something incredibly important to show her, something that would help her understand the true nature of life, death, and the ongoing battle between good and evil. Though she did not understand at the time, she knew that this encounter would forever change her understanding of reality. Have you ever wondered what heaven truly looks like? What if we could catch a glimpse of its beauty, its divine energy, and its pure harmony? Is it possible to witness the true glory of the heavenly realm and the beings that inhabit it? And what if, in the midst of all this splendor, there was a moment when everything began to change? For Isabella, these questions became more than abstract concepts. She was about to experience something that would completely transform her understanding of both heaven and the forces that shaped it. As she stood in the presence of Jesus, she was about to witness the story of one angel's rise to glory and the tragic fall that followed. This encounter would reveal the true nature of pride and its devastating consequences. It was in this moment that Jesus led her through a vision of heaven, and the beauty she saw far exceeded anything she could have imagined. Jesus led Isabella through a vision of heaven, and the beauty she saw far exceeded anything she could have imagined. It was not just a place of peace, but of vibrant life, where everything was alive with the presence of divine energy. The entire realm was bathed in light, and in every direction, Isabella could hear music, beautiful, harmonious sounds that filled the air with joy and love. It wasn't just music, but a manifestation of love itself, resonating through the entire space. As she took in the awe-inspiring sights, Jesus directed her attention toward one specific angel, Lucifer. At first glance, Lucifer was the most radiant and beautiful being Isabella had ever seen. He stood out among the others, both physically and spiritually. His wings shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow, their feathers sparkling like precious gems, and his form was surrounded by an aura of brilliance. His voice was strong and commanding, and he was the leader of the heavenly choir, his melody flowing with perfect harmony. Jesus spoke of Lucifer's former glory. He explained that Lucifer was once the most magnificent of all angels, created with extraordinary beauty, wisdom, and power. Lucifer had been chosen to be the guardian of God's throne, a position of honor and trust. His purpose was to lead the worship of God in heaven, and he did so with unparalleled grace and devotion. But as Isabella watched, she could sense that something was wrong. Though Lucifer seemed perfect in every way, Jesus urged her to pay close attention. "Not many have seen what you are witnessing now," he said. It was then that Isabella understood. This vision was not only about Lucifer's beauty, but also about the crucial moment when his perfection began to unravel. Jesus told Isabella that Lucifer's beauty and his privileged position in heaven had begun to foster feelings of pride. At first, this pride was subtle. Lucifer began to admire his own magnificence, noticing the beauty of his wings, his radiant form, and the adoration of those around him. He became enamored with the idea that he might be the most important being in existence. Over time, this subtle admiration grew into something much darker. Lucifer's pride transformed into a desire for power and control. He began to believe that he deserved more than the position he held. Jesus explained that Lucifer began to compare himself to others, questioning why he should continue to serve and worship God when he was clearly the most beautiful and wise of all angels. This pride, left unchecked, ultimately led Lucifer to challenge God's sovereignty. Jesus pointed out that the seeds of rebellion were sown when Lucifer started to think that he could rule on his own, that he could be as great as God himself. The angel who had once led the heavenly host in worship now began to seek his own glory. This rebellion was subtle at first, an internal struggle that would ultimately result in the fall of Lucifer. What Isabella was witnessing was the critical turning point, the moment when Lucifer's heart began to shift from pure worship to the desire for self-exaltation. This transformation marked the beginning of Lucifer's downfall, a downfall that would lead to his eventual expulsion from heaven. But it all started with pride, the very same pride that would later become the root of all evil in the universe. Have you ever wondered how something so pure, so perfect, could begin to unravel? What would cause the most radiant being, created by God himself, to fall so far? How does pride take root in a heart that was once full of grace and devotion? What is it that leads to rebellion? And how does it ripple through the heavenly realms? Is it possible that something as subtle as vanity could grow into something much darker, leading to a chain of events that would change the course of history forever? What happens when the very essence of beauty and perfection becomes a source of corruption, and the light that once shone so brightly begins to dim? As Isabella stood in awe of the vision unfolding before her, she was about to witness the tragic process by which Lucifer's fall began. The seeds of pride were being sown, and the consequences would be far-reaching, not just for Lucifer, but for all of creation. Isabella observed with a deep sense of sorrow as she witnessed Lucifer's transformation unfold gradually. It wasn't an instantaneous shift from perfection to rebellion, but rather a slow, insidious erosion of his character. Initially, Lucifer's growing vanity seemed almost harmless, even understandable. He had been created as the most beautiful and powerful of all the angels, his radiance, strength, and wisdom unparalleled. However, as he moved through the heavenly realms, his gaze increasingly lingered upon his own reflection in the golden streets of heaven. Each glance at himself sparked admiration, and slowly, this admiration bloomed into a dangerous obsession. Lucifer's beauty, once a source of humble gratitude, began to serve as a mirror to his ego. He began to delight in his own perfection, taking pride in his flawless form and exceptional talents. Isabella could see how this admiration shifted from a simple acknowledgement of his gifts to a full-fledged obsession with his image. His beauty, once a reflection of God's divine creation, became an object of worship for Lucifer himself. The more he gazed upon himself, the more he began to believe that he was deserving of more than just admiration. He felt entitled to adoration. As Lucifer's self-image grew, so too did his sense of superiority. He began to compare himself to other angels, and the more he compared, the more he felt his status was unmatched. The other angels, despite their own magnificence, seemed dull and insignificant by comparison. Lucifer started to convince himself that he was above them all, more worthy, more magnificent. He began to see himself not just as the greatest of all angels, but as a being who deserved more. He began to question why he should serve a God whom he now considered beneath him. Why should he offer his worship when he was the most beautiful and talented? Why should he obey when he could command? Jesus, in the vision, explained that pride was the root of all sin. Lucifer's pride had evolved from a quiet vanity into a deep-seated belief that he was superior to both the angels and God himself. This belief began to morph into a dangerous craving for something more than admiration. Lucifer wanted to be worshipped. He no longer desired to serve. He desired to be the object of worship. His pride had now transformed into an insatiable hunger for power. Lucifer, feeling the weight of his newfound desire, began to sow seeds of doubt in the hearts of other angels. He whispered words of rebellion, suggesting that they too were worthy of more than what God had given them. He questioned God's intentions, insinuating that God's authority was unjust, that they deserved more recognition, more glory. His words were subtle, seductive, and many angels, once loyal to God, began to feel discontented. The seeds of rebellion were planted, and Lucifer's pride had not only corrupted his own heart, but had begun to poison others as well. The vision deepened as Jesus revealed the profound and tragic role that free will played in Lucifer's fall. Jesus explained that free will is a gift from God, given to all of creation. It is the ability to choose, to love, to obey, or to reject. While free will is a precious gift, it also carries with it the possibility of rebellion. In the case of Lucifer, his free will had led him down a path of doubt, discontentment, and ultimately defiance. Lucifer's prideful desire to ascend above God's throne began to manifest in more than just private thoughts. His rebellion became an open defiance as he gathered those angels who shared his discontent and formed a faction against God. He declared, "I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." In that moment, he openly challenged God's sovereignty, aspiring not just to equality with God, but to a position even higher than the Creator. His words were filled with arrogance, and they marked the point of no return. As Lucifer's rebellion reached its peak, his once radiant form began to change. Isabella could see how the light that had once emanated from him began to dim. His beautiful wings lost their luster, and his countenance, once full of peace and grace, twisted into a scowl of anger and resentment. Darkness began to seep into his being, and where light had once resided, there was now a creeping shadow. Jesus told Isabella that this war in heaven was not one fought with swords or violence. Rather, it was a battle of ideals, light versus darkness, love versus pride. Lucifer and his followers, filled with darkness, waged war against the loyal angels, led by Archangel Michael, who represented the light and the will of God. The battle raged in the celestial realms, not with physical force, but with the clash of wills. Each side fought for the future of creation, with Lucifer's rebellion threatening to dismantle the divine order that had been established by God. In the end, it was Michael and the loyal angels who triumphed. Lucifer and his followers were defeated, their rebellion crushed by the light of God's truth. As the war reached its conclusion, Lucifer's form became more distorted, no longer a symbol of beauty, but a creature consumed by darkness. His wings were no longer vibrant, but tattered and torn. His once glorious light was snuffed out, replaced by a cold, impenetrable shadow. And finally, Lucifer and all of his followers were cast out of heaven, hurled down to the earth in a violent fall. Their rebellion was over, but its consequences would echo throughout eternity. As Isabella continued to watch the unfolding vision, a deep understanding began to form within her. The story of Lucifer's fall was not merely a tale of defiance or disobedience, but a deeper reflection of the consequences of free will, the very gift God had given to all of creation. It became clear to her that Lucifer's rebellion was the result of a choice made freely, not by force or predestination. God had granted Lucifer the ability to choose, to love and serve him, or to reject him. And tragically, Lucifer chose the latter. Through the vision, Isabella began to see the true depth of God's love. It was a love that could not be coerced, a love that was freely offered but could also be rejected. God did not force Lucifer to remain in his grace. Instead, he allowed him the freedom to choose his own path, knowing that love must be chosen to be real. Lucifer's pride became the root of his rejection, and in his refusal to accept God's love, his heart hardened and he turned away from repentance. Despite this, God never stopped loving him and continued to offer opportunities for redemption. But Lucifer's pride prevented him from accepting those offers, and his rebellion became final, leading him into darkness. The weight of this realization pressed heavily on Isabella's heart. The rebellion was not merely about disobedience. It was about the painful consequences of free will, the capacity to choose, and the ability to reject love. The gift of free will, while a blessing, came with the potential for its tragic misuse. And yet, this gift of choice was at the very heart of God's plan. But as the vision continued, Isabella began to see the ultimate purpose behind God's design. God's plan was not just about defeating evil or punishing those who rebelled. It was about redemption through love. The divine purpose was to create beings who could freely choose love, beings capable of both choosing evil and choosing good. This was the true path of spiritual refinement. Every trial, every hardship was an opportunity to choose love over selfishness, to grow spiritually and align more deeply with God's will. Isabella came to understand that, unlike angels, humans have a unique opportunity to evolve spiritually. Angels were created perfect, incapable of the kind of growth and evolution that humans could experience. Humans, through the daily choices they make, have the ability to rise above temptation and draw closer to God. Every act of humility, every choice to love, no matter how small, contributed to this spiritual evolution. As the vision progressed, Isabella saw that the true nature of hell was not what she had previously imagined. Hell was not a place where God punished the wicked, but a natural consequence of rejecting love. It was not about divine wrath, but about the self-imposed isolation that comes from choosing pride over humility, selfishness over selflessness. Hell was the result of closing oneself off from God's love, a choice that led to despair and darkness. Jesus also revealed a key difference between angels and humans in this context. While angels, like Lucifer, had made their choices definitively, humans still had the chance to repent. Unlike Lucifer, whose rebellion was irreversible, humans had the opportunity to turn away from selfishness and pride, to choose God's love, and to be redeemed. This potential for repentance, for change, made human beings precious in God's eyes. The battle between light and darkness was not just a cosmic struggle, but a personal one fought in the heart of every individual. The choices we make, no matter how small, are where the battle is won or lost. Every act of kindness, every prayer, every decision to choose love over indifference contributes to the fight against darkness. Jesus emphasized that humility and love were our strongest weapons, the antidote to the pride that Lucifer used to drag souls away from God. This battle was not defined by grand gestures, but by the quiet, daily choices we make to live in alignment with God's love. Isabella saw that these seemingly insignificant acts could have a ripple effect, influencing not just our lives, but the cosmic battle between good and evil. Eventually, Isabella was shown a vision of the final judgment, and it became clear to her that it would not be a trial of guilt and punishment. Instead, it would be a revelation of each person's true nature. The final judgment would not be about God deciding who was worthy or unworthy, but about each soul seeing clearly the choices they had made throughout their lives. Those who had chosen love would naturally gravitate toward God, while those who had chosen pride and selfishness would find themselves unable to bear the purity of God's love. In the end, Isabella realized that love is the most powerful force in the universe. It is love that holds all creation together, that gives life its meaning, and that enables all things to exist. Lucifer's fall came from his refusal to embrace love, his turning away from the divine love that he was created to reflect. In contrast, humanity had the opportunity to rise above Lucifer's fall by choosing love, by embracing humility, compassion, and selflessness. Jesus emphasized that love was the ultimate weapon in the battle against evil. It was not through force or violence that victory would be achieved, but through the power of love. When Isabella returned to her earthly life, she was forever changed. Her vision had deepened her faith and opened her eyes to the importance of the choices she made each day. No longer could she ignore the subtle ways pride could take root in her own heart. She became more intentional about cultivating love and humility in her relationships, understanding that each act of love, no matter how small, was part of a greater cosmic struggle. The battle between good and evil was fought in the heart, and it was through choosing love that she could align herself with God's plan, knowing that love would ultimately triumph over darkness. Love is the beginning and sustaining of life. Isabella's story reminds us to love ourselves, love those around us, and wherever we are. Love will always guide us. Light will overcome darkness, and good will defeat evil. Please spread the love in your story if you can relate to the experiences of the woman in this story. Thank you for listening,